love, loss, and second chances. What happens when a successful CEO crosses paths with a woman haunted by her past? Can two broken hearts find healing together? Stay tuned, because this story will take you on an emotional journey you won't forget. Marcus Sullivan sat alone in his sleek, modern penthouse overlooking the glittering skyline of San Francisco. The city buzzed with life below, its lights reflecting off the glass walls of his home, but inside there was only silence. At 36, Marcus was the founder and CEO of Sullivan Tech Solutions, a cutting-edge startup that had revolutionized the way businesses used artificial intelligence. His name was synonymous with innovation, and his company was valued in the billions. Yet, despite his success, Marcus felt an emptiness he couldn't shake. The world saw him as a visionary, a man who had everything: wealth, power, and influence. But behind the polished exterior was someone who had sacrificed too much. His days were consumed by endless meetings, product launches, and investor calls. His nights were spent staring at the city lights, wondering if this was all life had to offer. Tonight was no different. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a glass of whiskey in hand as he scrolled through emails on his phone. Another deal closed, another milestone reached. Yet, the satisfaction he once felt was gone. He glanced at the framed photo on his desk, a younger version of himself, smiling with his college friends. Back then, life had been simpler, filled with dreams and possibilities. Now it felt like he was running on a treadmill, chasing something he couldn't define. With a sigh, Marcus stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city stretched out before him, vibrant and alive, but it only made him feel more isolated. He had built an empire, but at what cost? Somewhere deep inside, he knew he was missing something real, something meaningful, and though he didn't know it yet, his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. He felt comforted by the position he was in now and the freedom he wanted, but he was being led to venture into a territory that he had never been before. The next evening, Marcus found himself wandering the streets of San Francisco after a particularly grueling day at work. A tense board meeting about the company's next big product launch had left him drained. He needed a break, an escape from the relentless pressure of his world. On a whim, he decided to stop by an art gallery he had passed countless times but never entered. It wasn't his usual scene, but something about the warm glow of the lights spilling onto the sidewalk drew him in. The gallery was hosting a small exhibition featuring local artists. The space was intimate, with soft jazz playing in the background, and the faint hum of conversations filling the air. Marcus moved through the room, his eyes scanning the paintings and sculptures, though his mind was elsewhere. He was about to leave when he noticed her. She stood in front of a large abstract painting, her head tilted slightly as if trying to decipher its meaning. Her presence was striking, effortlessly elegant, with a quiet confidence that set her apart from the crowd. She wore a simple navy dress, her dark hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders, but it was her eyes that caught Marcus's attention. Deep, thoughtful, and tinged with a sadness he couldn't quite place. For a moment he hesitated. He wasn't the type to approach strangers, especially not in a setting like this. But something about her drew him in, and before he could overthink it, he found himself standing beside her. "Huh, interesting, isn't it?" he said, gesturing to the painting. She turned to him, her lips curving into a small smile. "Interesting is one way to put it. I was just wondering if the artist was trying to confuse us on purpose." Her voice was warm, with a hint of humor that made Marcus smile. "Or maybe they're just as confused as we are," he replied. She laughed softly, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Marcus felt at ease. They began talking at first about the art, then about the city, and eventually about themselves. She introduced herself as Charlotte Blair, a data scientist who worked on projects aimed at using technology to solve social issues. Marcus was intrigued. She wasn't like anyone he had met before. She spoke with passion and purpose, her words carrying a depth that resonated with him. As the evening went on, their conversation grew more personal. Charlotte shared her love for art, and how it helped her find balance in a world dominated by numbers and algorithms. Marcus, in turn, opened up about the pressures of running a company and the loneliness that came with it. For the first time in years, he felt like someone truly understood him. But just as he was beginning to feel a connection, Charlotte glanced at her watch and sighed. "I should go," she said, her tone reluctant. "It was nice talking to you, Marcus." "Wait," he said, a hint of urgency in his voice. "Will I see you again?" Charlotte hesitated, her eyes searching his for a moment before she smiled faintly. "Maybe," she said, and with that she disappeared into the crowd, leaving Marcus standing alone in the gallery, wondering why he felt like he had just lost something he didn't even know he was looking for. For days after their encounter at the gallery, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about Charlotte. Her voice, her laugh, the way her eyes seemed to hold 1,000 untold stories, it all lingered in his mind. He had met countless people in his life, attended endless networking events, and yet no one had ever left such an impression on him. She was different. She was real. By chance, or perhaps fate, they crossed paths again a week later at a tech conference. Marcus had been invited as a keynote speaker, and as he scanned the room before his presentation, he spotted her sitting in the audience. She was taking notes, her focus entirely on the panel discussion. For a moment, he hesitated. Should he approach her? Would she even remember him? But the thought of letting her slip away again was unbearable. After his speech, Marcus made his way through the crowd, his heart pounding in a way that felt foreign to him. When he finally reached her, she looked up, surprised but pleased to see him. "Marcus," she said, her smile lighting up her face. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same," he replied, trying to sound casual despite the nervous energy coursing through him. "Are you here for work?" Charlotte nodded. "I'm presenting tomorrow. It's a project I've been working on for a nonprofit, using data analytics to improve access to healthcare in underserved communities." Her words struck a chord with Marcus. He had spent so much of his career focused on profit margins and market shares that he had never considered how his work could be used to make a real difference. As they talked, he found himself drawn not just to her intelligence, but to her passion. She wasn't just brilliant. She cared deeply about the world around her, and it showed in everything she said. Over the next few weeks, their paths continued to cross. Marcus began finding excuses to attend events he knew she'd be at, and Charlotte, though initially cautious, started to let her guard down. They shared long conversations over coffee, walks through the city, and even a few late-night phone calls. Slowly but surely, a bond began to form. One evening, as they sat on a park bench overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, Charlotte opened up about her past. She told Marcus about her fiancé Daniel, who had died in a car accident just days before their wedding. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and Marcus could see the pain etched into her features. "I thought I'd never recover," she admitted, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "For a long time, I didn't even want to try, but eventually I realized that I couldn't let his death define me. That's why I started working with nonprofits. It gave me a purpose, a way to honor his memory." Marcus listened intently, his heart aching for her. He wanted to say something, to offer comfort, but he knew that words wouldn't be enough. Instead, he reached out and took her hand in his, a silent gesture of support. Charlotte looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and for the first time, Marcus saw a flicker of hope in her expression. As their relationship deepened, Marcus began to change. He started questioning the choices he had made, the life he had built. For so long, he had been chasing success, believing it would bring him happiness. But now, he was beginning to see that happiness wasn't something you could buy or achieve. It was something you found in the connections you made, the people you loved. Charlotte, too, found herself drawn to Marcus in ways she hadn't expected. He was kind, thoughtful, and surprisingly vulnerable. Beneath the polished exterior of a tech mogul was a man who had his own scars, his own fears, and though she was still hesitant to let herself fall, she couldn't deny the way he made her feel safe, understood, and, for the first time in years, hopeful. But even as their bond grew stronger, there was an unspoken tension between them. Charlotte was still haunted by the fear of losing someone she loved, and Marcus, despite his best efforts, couldn't completely escape the demands of his career. They were two people from very different worlds, trying to navigate a connection that felt both inevitable and impossible. One night, as they sat together in Marcus's penthouse, Charlotte voiced the question that had been weighing on her mind. "Do you ever feel like we're too different?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus looked at her, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "I mean, your life is so fast-paced, so focused on success. And mine is, well, it's different, slower, more grounded. I'm not sure if we can make this work." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had been so focused on building something with her that he hadn't stopped to consider the challenges they might face. But as he looked into her eyes, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't ready to give up. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice firm. "Whatever it takes, Charlotte. I'm not letting you go." For a moment she said nothing, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "We'll try." And with that, they took the first tentative step toward a future neither of them could fully see, but both desperately wanted to believe in. For a while, things between Marcus and Charlotte seemed to fall into place. They found a rhythm balancing their vastly different lives with late-night conversations, shared dinners, and moments of quiet understanding. Marcus even began to take a step back from his relentless work schedule, delegating more responsibilities to his team so he could spend more time with her. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough, or so he thought. The cracks began to show when Marcus's company, Sullivan Tech Solutions, faced an unexpected crisis. A major product launch, an AI-driven platform designed to revolutionize business operations, was met with harsh criticism from the media and skepticism from investors. The platform, which Marcus had poured years of work into, was accused of being too invasive, raising concerns about data privacy. Overnight, the company's stock plummeted, and Marcus found himself in the middle of a firestorm. The pressure was immediate and overwhelming. Investors demanded answers, the board of directors called for emergency meetings, and the media painted Marcus as a reckless innovator who had overstepped ethical boundaries. For the first time in his career, Marcus felt like he was losing control. Charlotte noticed the change in him almost immediately. He became distant, his phone constantly buzzing with calls and emails. Their conversations grew shorter, their time together more infrequent. When they did see each other, Marcus was distracted, his mind elsewhere. Charlotte tried to be understanding. She knew how much his work meant to him, but it was hard not to feel like she was being pushed aside. One evening, after days of barely hearing from him, Charlotte decided to confront him. She showed up at his penthouse unannounced, finding him hunched over his laptop, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups. "Marcus," she said, her voice firm but calm, "we need to talk." He looked up, startled. "Charlotte, I'm sorry, I've just been busy," she finished for him. "I know, but this isn't working." Marcus frowned, setting his laptop aside. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I feel like I'm competing with your company for your attention, and I'm losing." Her words stung, but Marcus couldn't deny the truth in them. "Charlotte, you know how important this is. The company is in trouble. If I don't fix this, everything I've worked for could fall apart." "And what about us?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Do we even matter to you anymore?" "Of course you matter," he said, standing and moving toward her. "But this is my life, Charlotte. This is who I am. I can't just walk away from it." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm not asking you to walk away, Marcus. I'm asking you to make room for me, for us. But it feels like there's no space for anything else in your world." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. He wanted to tell her that she was wrong, that she was the most important thing in his life, But deep down, he knew that his actions didn't reflect that, and in that moment, he realized just how much he had taken her for granted. The tension between them only grew in the days that followed. Marcus threw himself even deeper into his work, desperate to salvage his company's reputation. He canceled plans with Charlotte, missed her calls, and ignored her messages. Each time, he told himself it was temporary, that once the crisis was over, he would make it up to her. But Charlotte wasn't sure how much longer she could wait. The breaking point came when Marcus made a decision that shattered the fragile trust between them. Charlotte had been working on a nonprofit project that relied on funding from Sullivan Tech Solutions, a partnership Marcus had personally approved. But under pressure from the board to cut costs, Marcus was forced to pull the funding, leaving Charlotte's project in jeopardy. When she found out, she was devastated. She confronted him at his office, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. "You promised me," she said, her eyes blazing. "You said you believed in what I was doing, and now you're just cutting me off like it doesn't matter?" "Charlotte, it's not that simple," Marcus said, his tone defensive. "The board made the decision. My hands were tied." "Don't you dare blame this on the board," she shot back. "You're the CEO, Marcus. You could have fought for this. But you didn't. You chose your company over me." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He wanted to explain, to make her understand, but the look in her eyes told him it was too late. She had already made up her mind. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't keep waiting for you to figure out what really matters. I thought we had something real, but maybe I was wrong." "Charlotte, please," Marcus said, his voice desperate. "Don't do this." But she was already walking away, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. And for the first time in his life, Marcus felt truly powerless. That night, as he sat alone in his office, Marcus replayed their conversation over and over in his mind. He had spent his entire life building an empire, believing that success would bring him happiness. But now, as he stared at the empty chair where Charlotte had sat just hours before, he realized that he had been wrong. Success meant nothing without someone to share it with. And for the first time, he wondered if he had lost the one person who could have made his life whole. The days after Charlotte walked out of Marcus's life were a blur. He threw himself into work, trying to drown out the ache in his chest with endless meetings, late nights, and the constant hum of his phone. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the emptiness that had settled over him. The penthouse felt colder, the city quieter, and for the first time the success he had worked so hard to achieve felt meaningless. Charlotte, meanwhile, had retreated to her hometown, a small, picturesque coastal village a few hours outside the city. It was a place she hadn't visited in years, but it was where she had grown up, where she had once felt safe. The salty breeze and the sound of waves crashing against the shore brought her a sense of calm she hadn't felt in a long time. She spent her days volunteering at a local community center, helping children with after-school programs, and organizing food drives. It was her way of finding purpose, of healing. But even in the quiet of the village, Marcus was never far from her thoughts. She missed him, his laugh, his determination, the way he had made her feel seen in a way no one else ever had. But she also knew that she couldn't go back to the way things were. She had spent too much of her life waiting for people to change, and she wasn't willing to do it again. If Marcus wanted to be a part of her life, he would have to prove that he was ready to make room for her. For Marcus, the realization of what he had lost came slowly, like a fog lifting after a storm. At first, he told himself that he was better off without her. Relationships were messy, unpredictable, and he had never been good at them. But as the days turned into weeks, he began to see the truth. He had been running from his feelings, from the vulnerability that came with truly opening up to someone, and in doing so, he had pushed away the one person who had made him feel alive. One night, as he sat alone in his office, Marcus found himself staring at the photo of Charlotte he had saved on his phone. It was from one of their first outings together, a candid shot of her laughing at something he had said. Her eyes sparkled with joy, and for a moment he could almost hear her laugh. The memory hit him like a wave, and before he knew it, he was dialing her number. The call went straight to voicemail. "Charlotte," he said after the beep, his voice heavy with regret. "I don't even know where to start. I messed up, I let you down, and I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I miss you. I miss us. Please, just call me back. Or don't. I just needed you to know." He hung up, his chest tight with a mix of hope and despair, but the call went unanswered, and Marcus knew that words alone wouldn't be enough to fix what he had broken. Determined to make things right, Marcus began to reevaluate his life. He started delegating more responsibilities at work, trusting his team to handle the day-to-day operations. He reached out to the board, fighting to reinstate the funding for Charlotte's nonprofit project. It wasn't easy. There were heated arguments, pushback from investors, but Marcus refused to back down. For the first time, he wasn't just thinking about profits or reputation. He was thinking about what truly mattered. Meanwhile, Charlotte was beginning to find her own sense of peace. The village, with its quiet streets and close-knit community, reminded her of the simpler life she had once dreamed of. She spent her evenings walking along the beach, the cool sand beneath her feet grounding her in the present. But no matter how much she tried to move on, there was a part of her that still longed for Marcus. She hated how much she missed him, how much she wanted to believe that he could change. It wasn't until a few weeks later that she heard from him again, not through a call or a text, but through an email from the nonprofit's board of directors. The funding for her project had been reinstated, along with a personal note from Marcus. "I know this doesn't make up for what I did," the note read, "but I believe in what you're doing, Charlotte. I always have, and I'm sorry it took me so long to show it." Charlotte stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She didn't know what to think. Was this his way of apologizing, of trying to win her back? Or was it something more? She closed her laptop, unsure of what to do. That night, as she sat on the porch of her childhood home, watching the stars twinkle above the ocean, she realized that she wasn't angry anymore. She was still hurt, still cautious, but the anger that had burned so brightly in her chest had faded, and in its place was something softer, something that felt a lot like hope. Marcus knew that words alone wouldn't be enough to win Charlotte back. He had spent weeks reflecting on his mistakes, on the choices that had driven her away, but reflection wasn't enough. He needed to act. He needed to show her, not just tell her, that he was ready to change. And so, one crisp morning, he packed a bag, left the chaos of San Francisco behind, and drove to the small coastal village where Charlotte had grown up. Because forgive me for saying this when we first met, the drive was long, giving him plenty of time to second-guess himself. What if she didn't want to see him? What if it was too late? But every time doubt crept in, he reminded himself of the way she had looked at him during their happiest moments, the warmth in her eyes, the quiet trust that had once existed between them. He wasn't ready to give up on that. Not yet. When he arrived in the village, it was like stepping into another world. The streets were quiet, lined with quaint cottages and small shops. The air smelled of salt and seaweed, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the silence. It was a stark contrast to the fast-paced, high-stakes world he was used to, but Marcus found it oddly comforting. He found Charlotte at the community center, surrounded by a group of children who were painting colorful murals on the walls. She was laughing, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, a streak of blue paint smudged across her cheek. For a moment, Marcus just watched her, his heart swelling with a mix of longing and admiration. She looked happy, truly happy, and he wondered if he had any right to disrupt that. But then she turned and saw him. Her laughter faded, replaced by a look of surprise and uncertainty. The children around her continued to chatter and paint, oblivious to the tension that had suddenly filled the room. "Marcus," she said, her voice soft but guarded. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he said, his voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through him. "I needed to tell you that I'm sorry. For everything." Charlotte crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. You already said that, in your voicemail and your email. I know, he said, taking a step closer. But I didn't just come here to apologize. I came here to show you that I mean it. She raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Marcus hesitated for a moment, then gestured to the mural. Teach me, he said. Let me help. Charlotte blinked, caught off guard. You want to paint? I want to do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm serious, he said. That I'm not the same person I was before. I don't just want to say I've changed. I want to show you. For a long moment, Charlotte just stared at him, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe him. Then, with a small sigh, she handed him a paintbrush. Fine, she said, but don't blame me if you ruin the mural. Marcus smiled, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. Deal. The hours that followed were messy and chaotic, but also strangely wonderful. Marcus was terrible at painting. His lines were crooked, his colors clashed, but he didn't care. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about work or deadlines or the expectations of others. He was just present. And as he worked alongside Charlotte, he began to see the world through her eyes. The joy she found in helping others, the beauty she saw in the simplest things. By the time the mural was finished, Marcus was covered in paint, his shirt ruined, but he didn't care. The children cheered as they admired their work, and even Charlotte couldn't hide her smile. You're not half bad, she said, her tone teasing. Liar, Marcus replied, grinning, but I'll take it. As the children left and the sun began to set, Marcus and Charlotte found themselves alone in the quiet of the community center. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. I meant what I said, Marcus finally said, his voice soft. I'm not the same person I was before. I've been making changes at work, in my life, because I realize that none of it matters without you. You're the one thing I don't want to lose, Charlotte. She looked at him, her eyes searching his for a long moment. I don't know if I can trust you again, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can go through that kind of hurt again. I understand, Marcus said, his heart aching at her words. And I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust back, no matter how long it takes. Charlotte's gaze softened, and for the first time Marcus saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. You're stubborn, you know that? She said, a small smile tugging at her lips. I've been told, he replied, his own smile breaking through, but only when it's worth it. And in that moment, as the last rays of sunlight streamed through the windows, Charlotte took a tentative step toward him. It wasn't a promise, but it was a start, and for Marcus, that was enough. Months passed, and slowly but surely, Marcus and Charlotte began to rebuild what they had lost. It wasn't easy trust. Once broken, took time to mend. But Marcus was patient, and Charlotte, though cautious, allowed herself to believe in him again. They took things one step at a time, learning how to navigate their differences and support each other in ways they hadn't before. Marcus made good on his promise to change. He restructured his company, delegating more responsibilities to his team and creating a healthier work-life balance. He even launched a new initiative within Sullivan Tech Solutions, focusing on using technology to support nonprofit organizations like Charlotte's. It was his way of combining his passion for innovation with a newfound sense of purpose. Charlotte, too, found herself growing in ways she hadn't expected. With Marcus's support, she expanded her nonprofit's reach, helping more communities than ever before. She began to let go of the fear that had held her back for so long, the fear of losing someone she loved, and in doing so, she found the courage to fully embrace the life she wanted. One crisp autumn evening, Marcus surprised Charlotte with a trip to the beach near her hometown. It was the same spot where they had first begun to reconnect, the place where he had painted alongside her and the children. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Marcus turned to her, his expression serious but warm. Charlotte, he said, taking her hands in his. "You've taught me so much about love, about life, about what really matters. I don't want to spend another day without you by my side. Will you marry me?" Charlotte's breath caught in her throat as she looked at him, her heart pounding. For a moment, she said nothing, the weight of the moment settling over her. But then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, I'll marry you." The months that followed were a whirlwind of planning and celebration. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair, held on the same beach where Marcus had proposed. Surrounded by close friends and family, they exchanged vows that spoke not just of love, but of growth, forgiveness, and the promise of a future built together. But their story didn't end there. Together, Marcus and Charlotte founded a new organization, the Sullivan Blair Foundation, dedicated to using technology and data to support underserved communities. It was a project that combined their strengths and passions, a testament to the journey they had taken together. As they stood side by side at the Foundation's launch event, watching the smiles of the people they had helped, Marcus turned to Charlotte and took her hand. "We've come a long way," he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. "We have," she agreed, leaning into him, "and we're just getting started." And as they looked out at the crowd, their hearts full of hope and gratitude, they knew that their story was far from over. Together they had found not just love, but a purpose that would carry them forward, one step, one day, one dream at a time. Thank you so much for watching this story on Emma's Stories. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt and inspiring tales. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more stories to life. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. See you in the next story.